The sentencing of Axel Rudakubana, whose attack at Southport dance class claimed the lives of three young girls, has not only devastated the community, but it reignites debates about terrorism, social values, how society defines and addresses acts of extreme violence. And Rudakubana's actions, premeditated, indiscriminate, brutal, led to charges of murder, attempted murder, terror offences, including producing ricin and possessing an Al Qaeda training manual. His crimes align with characteristics traditionally associated with terrorism, but that doesn't make them in themselves terrorist. These traditional characteristics, the ideological influence, the biological weapon, the deliberate targeting of innocents, yet his background, a troubled youth, expelled from school, alienated from his peers, blurs simplistic calculations and categorizations which have been exploited, of course, by people on the right wing, by Farage and Tommy Robinson and so on, and ignited these riots in Southport as well and elsewhere. The shockwaves of his crimes are felt most acutely, of course, in Southport, where families mourn, survivors grapple with trauma, and witnesses give accounts of Rudakubana's capture. They reveal a duality, a figure of monstrous violence reduced to a scared boy when detained, and this dichotomy underscores the challenge of reconciling his horrific actions with his own human vulnerability. The former Chancellor, Kwasi Kwarteng, his allegations of a cover-up surrounding Rudakubana's background have sparked controversy. His claim that authorities initially presented Rudakubana as a Welsh choir boy reflects frustration with perceived sanitisation of the narrative, and whether an intentional suppression of information or an effort to prevent racial or religious scapegoating. Such accusations highlight the tension between transparency and social stability. And frankly, Kwarteng's insight, delivered on GB News, not surprisingly, is both insensitive and silly. His framing touches on broader issues of trust in institutions by withholding or filtering details the authorities risked and have risked exacerbating public suspicion and I suppose the unstated question is whether or not the authorities are responsible for the riots which then took place. I think not. The riots and the rioters are responsible for those riots. And exposing every aspect risks inflaming prejudices and vigilante actions, as seen in the harassment of an unrelated family wrongly blamed for Rudakubana's trajectory. Rudakubana's case challenges legal and social definitions of torture, certainly, or of terrorism, certainly, but traditional definitions often emphasize political or religious motives, yet his possession of extremist material suggests ideological engagement. I think there's a good reason to redefine terrorism in terms of its impact rather than its intention, in the same way as we should redefine torture in terms of its impact rather than its intention. And so you can ask, was this an act of a radicalized individual or a mentally disturbed loner grasping at symbols of power? The presence of ricin and Al Qaeda materials raises chilling questions about accessibility and intent. It raises chilling questions that the knife he got raises chilling questions about the availability of weapons through organizations as innocuous as Amazon. But, this is about an individual who is damaged, a damaged individual, rather than somebody acting with a group. And that's that must be one of the considerations. But the other consideration is, was the effect one of terrorism? Did he terrorize the community? And the answer has to be yes. Psychological profiles and the failures of the system must also be interrogated. Expelled for carrying a knife, he exhibited violent tendencies early, compounded by reported bullying, by isolation, by unmet mental health needs. This is about the failure of the community. Social services' inability to intervene effectively adds to a troubling narrative of neglect. Kwarteng's reference to a potential dead cat strategy, a deliberate distraction, insinuates the government may use Rudakubana's sentencing to deflect from broader issues like knife crime, like mental health services, like online extremism. And critics argue that focusing on Rudakubana's aberration risks obscuring the flaws in the system that foster such violence. There are lessons for society here. The case illuminates critical failings, access to weapons and materials. Rudakubana acquired the knife and the biological toxin with alarming ease. The failures in education and social care, his exclusion, the subsequent isolation, illustrate risks of neglecting vulnerable children. And the narrative control, managing public information without alienating or inciting communities, is a delicate balancing act, and one that clearly went wrong in the summer, but was clearly exacerbated by the stupidity of the questions being asked by Farage, the narratives being put forward by Tommy Robinson and by I can't remember his name now, the fellow in Romania, and I don't think Kwasi Kwarteng's discussion is in any way helpful. I also think the other stories about the poisoning of the neighbourhood cat are interesting and deserve merit. They merit discussion, but again, these are triggers that should have been picked up. And if you have a police force that is inaccessible, like you have a Home Office that is inaccessible, like so many of the other government systems that are inaccessible to ordinary people, one shouldn't be surprised, A, that the system does not pick up problems when they first present, and B, that the narratives are not clear. The victims, and that people don't trust the official statements, because the officials have not created that environment for trust. The victims' families, the Southport community, face a long road to healing, requiring support and an active sort of commemoration of the victims. For the society at large, the case demands real reform, stricter weapon control, proactive mental health intervention, a re-evaluation about how terrorism is defined and addressed, and a suppression of the narratives peddled by Farage and Kwarteng and these people who seem to thrive on this sort of sensationalism. Rudakubana's sentencing may provide some closure, but the broader questions of why and how this tragedy occurred must be central to the public debate. He's being sentenced today.